Yes.
So, Mr. Bishop, I've got a number of questions that I'm going to ask you now because they come from a number of different sources. They'll move around from topic to topic. You referred to your team as being plasma specialists. What training or expertise would your team have had in the risks of viral transmission from pooled products?
Training would be relating to the published clinical papers. At the time, that would be ongoing and a progressive thing, plus the state-of-art knowledge that existed, at the time. It was a continual training process, and attendance at world national symposia where all the scientists and everybody was, presenting papers and posters. They would have access to that, and that would be an ongoing training process.
You said this morning in your evidence that in 1976 the general public knew of the risk of hepatitis B from blood and blood products. What's the source of your understanding of the general public's knowledge of hepatitis B?
Well, I just assumed that everybody knew the problems with hepatitis B and hepatitis C because, as I say, it was I thought to be general knowledge.
You referred to you having more contact with the leading opinion formers in the larger centres. Who would you identify as the leading opinion formers in the late 70s and early 80s?
Without upsetting anybody, I suppose Dr. Ritz, Peter Kernoff, Professor Bloom, Frank Hill, Eric Preston, Charlie Hay. There's many of them.
How was Armour able to offer its product to the market in the UK at a lower price than its competitors?
Well, that was just a decision made by the US in relation to sales and marketing plans, I can't say how exactly the price was arrived at, except to say that the profit made from selling at that price would have been acceptable and in the budgeted numbers.
Did you
and acceptable?
Sorry. Did you yourself ever visit a Plasma Reliance centre in the States?
Yes, Knoxville.
And can you recall roughly what year that might have been, or what decade?
No, I can't. Well, as did a number of UK haemophilia centre directors, including Peter Jones, etc.
I'd asked you earlier about Armour managing to sell its product in Scotland, which, broadly speaking, had been less reliant on commercial products. And we looked at the figures for the York Hill Hospital in Glasgow and Edinburgh. Do you recall which individual or individuals in your sales team was responsible for selling products to the Scottish market in the late 70s and early 80s? Was it you, or was there another particular individual?
It would have. I'm trying to think of the plasma specialist in the north at that time. It would have been a combination of myself and the northern plasma specialist at that time.
Were any particular incentives offered by Armour to the York Hill Hospital in Glasgow to break into the Scottish market?
Absolutely not. No.
When testing for HIV became available, were all prior and current batches tested for positivity?
I don't recall.
Same question in relation to the availability of testing for hepatitis C. Do you recall whether batches were tested for positivity?
I don't recall.
What, if any, investigations were undertaken within or on behalf of ARMA to establish whether there was ultimately HIV positivity in the batches of heat-treated factor VIII said to have been associated with HIV infections in the UK?
I don't recall.
Are you aware of ARMA settling legal claims, whether ARMA UK or ARMA US, arising out of treatment with factor VIII HT?
No. UK certainly there was no litigation.
When I asked you this morning about your interactions with the Haemophilia Society, you said you met them, I think, fairly frequently, every month or so it might have been, but you didn't alert them in 1985 and 1986 to the possibility that ARMA's heat-treated product could be infected. Why not, and how did that fit with what you describe ARMA's ethos to have been?
It may well have been unofficially discussed, but the Haemophilia Society and indeed individual patients were very, very well informed about their condition and about the science. More so, I think, than any other speciality. So they may well have been, found out things from their own observations.
Would it not have been more in keeping with what you describe ARMA's ethos to have been, to tell, not unofficially, but officially, the Haemophilia Society of the concerns that the heat-treated product might have been infected?
No, again, that would have been under the direction of the medical department. They could, I think possibly the concern about divulging too much unproven information would have been had the same impact as the Peter Jones premature statement at that AIDS meeting.
I asked you whether you told your own sales staff about the Lewisham case, Dr. Whitmore's case, and you said probably not. Even if you were prevented by the Regulatory Affairs Department from telling clinicians about that case, why did you not tell your own staff?
I can't remember specifically if we did or not, but obviously the plasma specialist responsible for that region would, of course, have been acquainted with it by his or her meetings with Dr. Whitmore. But because everything was not proven and above board, one was very careful. They were very careful as to how that information was divulged and to whom.
During the second half of the 70s, first half of the 80s, did you or your team show or give to the clients, the customers to whom you were trying to sell your product, any materials that would compare the risks posed by ARMA products to the risks posed by ARMA's competition?
Only in terms of the technical bulletins that were issued to the plasma team.
Sorry, that's bulletins provided to the plasma team. Was comparative material comparing ARMA as against other products, alphas or whoever's, part of the marketing materials you provided haemophilia centres with?
Only in the form of the of the plasma bulletins. I don't recall distributing any specific information as in tabular form, comparing the different companies.
As we established this afternoon, Armour withdrew its heat-treated product from the UK market in October of 1986 and indeed relinquished its licence in October of 1986. Yep. The Creva report suggests that the Dutch government in the Netherlands recalled heat-treated Factor 8 in February 1988. Can you recall that or what led to that?
No.
The product having been withdrawn from the UK market in October 1986, what, if anything, did you tell people in the other markets for which you were responsible about that withdrawal or about the safety or otherwise of the Armour product?
Well, the specialists responsible for the other markets would have the same information, and presumably it would be discussed with the other countries. But I can't recall whether direct correspondence went to haemophilia centres in the other countries for the medical department.
And do you recall? In relation to those other countries for which you were responsible, do you recall any express consideration being given within Armour UK or to whether the product should be withdrawn in those other countries?
No special consideration.
Okay. You described Armour as an essential member of the team looking after the interests of people with haemophilia. How was it in patients' interests for a team member to withhold information about the seroconversions on Factor 8 HT?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yes. The question picks up on your own description of Armour as an essential member of the team looking after the interests of people with haemophilia. How was it in the interest of people with haemophilia not to give them full information about the suspected seroconversions?
Well, the information, are you talking about to patients?
Oh, yes, or to centres for transmission to patients or through some form of public material or to the Haemophilia Society?
Well, to patients, it would have been the initiative of the clinician.
Okay. But the clinician can't tell patients what the clinician doesn't know. So how was it part of the team ethos that you describe for Armour not to ensure that clinicians were fully informed about the possible seroconversions on Factor 8 HT?
They were fully informed as far as our own medical people were able to inform them. With the data, etc., available.
Is the following a fair way to sum up Armour UK's attitude to risk in the 1980s in relation to AIDS? That unless and until there was conclusive proof that the Armour product could transmit AIDS, Armour's products were safe and risk-free?
Yes, as far as the evidence related to that.
So those are the additional questions that I propose to ask from those suggested by core participants. Do you have any questions for Mr. Bishop?
Yes, I do. As someone who was marketing armour and establishing it as a market leader, did you keep tabs on what your rivals were doing?
Yes.
So you would have known quite a lot, as much as you could find out anyway, about what Alpha and Qatar and Highland were doing to achieve a market share.
As I said earlier, the haemophilia community, including the companies supplying product, it was a very, very closed and small speciality, and people from the industry, at senior level and at my level, and the representatives levels, would be in, often constant conversation with each other. So invariably information was discussed, and
well, it just leads on to me to ask you about a document we looked at. It's ARMO 40252. Shumik, can we? Thank you. And this is the letter which you wrote to Mr. College, possibly a GP, as it would appear from the heading.
yes.
And at the very bottom of the page that we're looking at, the paragraph beginning, it's a paragraph which led to an exchange between you and me at the time. Despite the fact that there is, can we just highlight that, thank you? Despite the fact there is little evidence to associate plasma component therapy with the transmission of AIDS. Now, the date of this, let's go back to the top of the page. 24th of May, 1983. So, little evidence to associate plasma component therapy with the transmission of AIDS. That was your position on behalf of ARMA. You would have been aware, I suppose. Can we have a look, please, Shumik? I hope you've got it still on the system.
Sorry, Sir Brian. I think we agreed that should read little proof, didn't we?
I beg your pardon?
Didn't we agree, the terminology, that there was little proof?
Little proof, yes.
Yeah.
Very well. Well, let me just ask you about the document CBLA 5060_067. I hope you've still got that on the system, Shumik. It's a document we saw in the last few days. If you can't find it.
No, if Shumik doesn't have it currently, it's because it wasn't provided to Mr. Bishop in advance of his evidence.
Don't worry about that. Evidence which we've heard was that on the 7th of January, 1983, Alpha published a press release which says that the evidence suggests, although it does not absolutely prove, that the cause of AIDS is a virus or other disease agent which can be transmitted to haemophilic patients with AIDS in the factor VIII concentrate. So that, take it from me, that's the wording which there is in the press release. In January.
Is that factor V111 or
Factor V111, not your factor VIII, but factor VIII.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
So it's talking generally about the products made by pharmaceutical companies. Obviously, it's Alpha who are saying it, so it has particular relevance to their own product. how do you see that? How did that influence your thinking and your view of the state of the art in May when you were saying there was little evidence to associate plasma component therapy? Little evidence to associate, little proof of association. It seemed to be sufficient, perhaps, for Alpha to think there might well be an association.
Well, that was the way they thought or interpreted whatever information was out there, and differed from the Armour interpretation.
You would have been aware of that, would you, at the time, keeping tabs on the opposition?
Oh yes, yeah.
You described how you were keen that what you said was state of the art. And you were taken to ARMO 40250_002. Thank you. And if we scroll down through this, this is from the National Haemophilia Foundation in the United States. Can we scroll down to the next page? And to the next page, please. The recommendations to prevent AIDS in patients with haemophilia. And what you said this morning was, do you have any recollection of whether within ARMA there was discussion of these specific recommendations? And you say, well, obviously there would have been, but as far as you can tell, looking down those, ARMA would have complied with all of that. Do you want to just look down and check? Can we scroll this up a bit, please, up the page? Thank you. It's recommendations to factor VIII concentrate manufacturers. Under A and under A3, sorry, under A2, I mean, are you satisfied that ARMA would have evaluated and implemented surrogate laboratory tests?
Yes, yeah.
We have heard in the course of this week, in Council's presentation to me, that the pharmaceutical industry was, in the view at least of one of the observers, I think from Qatar, doing its best to put off the introduction of surrogate laboratory tests for as long as it could. And the chair of the committee considering the question was Michael Riddell, who was an ARMA employee at the time. Do you have any comment to make on that?
No. No.
So it would still appear to you, despite that the evaluation implementation of surrogate laboratory tests was something which, looking at that, ARMA would have complied with?
I would have assumed that and felt confident of that, yes.
Assumed it. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. That's all that I'm going to ask.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Mr. Bishop, is there anything you wanted to add to your evidence?
No. Are we at the end of the questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to reiterate my comments at the end of my first statement, that the whole thing, the development of AIDS and Hep B has been a terrible tragedy. None felt more so than us, or certainly at ARMA in the industry, because over the course of time, we ourselves had many friends in the haemophilia community who were lost, and So we feel, you know, equally, not equally, but we also feel the pain and concern to those that have suffered and those affected. And again, can just reiterate our sincere apologies and sympathies to all those people and their families.
Thank you, Sir Brian.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bishop, for your patience in what's been a long day for you, I know, and answering as best you can some searching questions. We've benefited by listening to you. I think what we'll take from your evidence is that you're firm that whatever might be said about it by others, ARMA did its very best to ensure the safety of patients who had their products and did everything it could, as indeed you tell us, so did you, within the limits of the powers that were given to you, given that the regulatory and medical departments had so much to do with the more technical aspects of matters. So I think we've understood that's your position. And thank you for coming to display it to us.
Okay, well, thank you, Sir Brian. I hope it's been of some help anyway.
Ms. Richards.
So that concludes the hearings for this week. We resume on Tuesday with the start of a number of weeks of hearings looking at the blood services. The inquiry's timetable has been updated on the inquiry's website this morning to give details of all witnesses between now and Christmas. We've also then given details of the sitting weeks from January through to Easter and the broad topics that will be considered, but not yet the details of witnesses. But we will populate that as soon as we're practically able to.
Well, I hope that that allows those who are here and those who are listening to be able to do a bit of forward planning. That's the purpose of releasing it and letting people know as soon as we can, at least when we're going to be sitting, even if we can't quite yet say who precisely will be giving evidence on which particular date.
And next week is entirely comprised of presentations on the structure of the National Blood Transfusion Services, early look-back exercises, and then looking at Professor Cash and Dr. Gunson. And then the following week we turned to hear the first of a number of oral witnesses from amongst the regional transfusion directors.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. And I look forward to seeing you, those of you who are here next Tuesday, 10 o'clock.